A lonely farmer opens his door to a woman drenched in rain, never guessing she's the billionaire heiress who just vanished from her own wedding. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sky cracked open with a sound like splintering timber. Rain pelted the fields in sheets, battering the windows of the farmhouse as wind howled through the trees like a warning. Samuel Carter stood on the porch, boots planted, arms crossed, watching his rows of corn bend and shudder under the weight of the storm. He'd spent the morning tying down the chicken coop and covering the vegetable beds with tarps stitched together from old feed bags. The forecast had said light rain. What they got was nature's fury. The gutters overflowed, mud sucked at the steps. And somewhere beyond the fence line, a distant crack followed by a flash of light told him lightning was getting too close for comfort. He turned to go back inside when he heard it. 3 quick knocks, not quite frantic, but urgent enough to freeze him mid-step. He opened the door to a stranger. She stood there, soaked to the bone, her coat plastered to her frame, and hair clinging to her cheeks in dripping strands. A suitcase sat in the mud behind her, half open, its contents protected only by a garbage bag. She didn't speak, just stood there, shivering. Samuel blinked. "You lost?" Her lips parted, the words slow and careful. "My car slid off the road about a mile back. Phone's dead. I saw the lights from your porch." He looked past her into the storm. No car in sight. Just darkness and rain and the weight of someone else's bad day. "Well," he said, stepping aside, "you better come in before you drown." She hesitated just long enough for him to notice, and then stepped inside. Her boots squelched against the old wood floor. He grabbed a towel from the coat rack and handed it to her, wordlessly. She took it with a grateful nod and began wringing out her sleeves. The wind slammed the door behind her. He glanced at her again. No ring, no name offered. But there was something in her eyes, something too calm for someone in distress. Not fear, not panic, something else, something deeper. The storm outside raged on, and inside Samuel Carter suddenly had the strange feeling that the real storm had just walked through his front door. She stood in the middle of the living room like someone unaccustomed to not being in control. Water dripped steadily from the hem of her coat, pooling on the worn rug beneath her boots. The towel hung limp in her hands, forgotten, as her eyes scanned the room, not with judgment, but with a strange kind of detachment, like she wasn't really seeing it. Her blouse clung to her like it was trying to remember warmth. And yet, despite the chill in the air, she didn't ask for a blanket. She didn't move toward the fire Samuel had stoked earlier. She just stood there, as if unsure what she was supposed to do now that she wasn't fleeing anymore. Samuel noticed the details. The coat, Burberry or something close to it, mud-splattered now, but high-end, unmistakably tailored. The shoes weren't made for gravel roads or rainstorms. Thin soles, sleek leather, probably cost more than his entire month's groceries. And then there were her eyes, hollow, yes, but not vacant. They held something behind them, something still burning, like a pilot light just barely holding on. He cleared his throat. "You want to sit down? I can make coffee. Or tea?" She blinked as if pulled out of some deep internal place. "Tea," she said finally, "if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," he said, already moving to the kitchen. She followed him with her gaze but didn't speak again, not even when the kettle began to sing. As he poured hot water over a bag of chamomile, he stole another glance at her. She'd removed the coat but kept her arms wrapped around herself like armor. Her sweater, though soaked, was fine knit cashmere. Her necklace looked like real gold, and yet here she was, standing in his old farmhouse like she'd never seen shelter before. He handed her the mug. Her fingers brushed his briefly, cold as stone. She thanked him quietly. "I'm Samuel, by the way," he offered. "Elena," she said. Just that. No last name, no explanation. He nodded once. "All right, Elena, you're safe here." She looked at him, and something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but a softening, like the weight of whatever she was carrying had been set down, just for a moment. The storm had knocked the power out hours ago. Samuel lit the last of his kerosene lanterns and placed it at the center of the kitchen table, casting long golden shadows that flickered across the peeling wallpaper. The room smelled of rosemary and garlic, the simple kind of meal he cooked when there wasn't much in the pantry, but still something worth sharing. Elena sat at the far end of the table, steam rising from the bowl in front of her. She cupped it in her hands like it was the first warmth she'd felt in days. The soup was potato and lentil, thick, hearty, nothing fancy, but she ate it like it mattered. Neither of them spoke much at first. Only the soft clink of spoon against ceramic filled the space between them. Samuel wasn't sure if the silence was awkward or just necessary. Some people needed words to fill the void. Others needed quiet to feel whole again. He wasn't sure which one she was yet. "You always keep soup around for strangers in a storm?" she asked at last, her voice low, almost testing him. He glanced up. "Only the good kind." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "How do you know which kind I am?" He shrugged, chewing slowly. "You didn't barge in. You knocked." She lowered her gaze, staring into her bowl like she was trying to find something buried at the bottom. "You could have turned me away." "Wasn't raised that way." That seemed to land somewhere in her. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then took another bite. The lantern flickered, wind howling outside like a creature circling the walls. The storm didn't seem in any hurry to leave. Samuel leaned back in his chair. "So, Elena?" She looked up, eyes steady but guarded. "No last name?" A pause. Her spoon hovered above her bowl before she set it down gently. "Not tonight." He nodded, not pressing. There was something in the way she said it. A line drawn, not in hostility, but in exhaustion. "All right," he said. "No last names, just soup and shelter. That's enough for one night." And in the silence that followed, something between them settled. Not certainty, not yet. But maybe something quieter, something like trust. The wind had eased by morning, but the sky still brooded, thick with leftover gray. The kitchen smelled of toast and burnt coffee. Samuel fiddled with the battery-powered radio he kept above the fridge, one of those clunky relics that still worked when everything else gave up. The power hadn't come back, and the world outside the farmhouse felt wrapped in cotton, muted, waiting. He turned the knob, static cracking, voices warbling until a clear one broke through. And in other news, search efforts continue this morning for Elena Whitmore, heiress to the Whitmore automotive fortune, who reportedly vanished just hours before her wedding to real estate mogul Carter Voss. Whitmore was last seen leaving the Whitmore estate in upstate New York yesterday afternoon. Her family has declined to comment, but sources close to the family suggest a private disagreement may have preceded her departure. Samuel stilled, one hand on the toaster, the other gripping his coffee mug. The name hit like a misplaced nail in a boot, unexpected, sharp. He turned slightly, eyes flicking across the room. Elena sat at the table, legs crossed, mug of tea resting gently between her palms. She made no move to speak, no flinch, no reaction, just sipped, eyes on the steam swirling above the rim. "Authorities are asking anyone with information to contact—" Samuel clicked the radio off. For a long second, the only sound in the room was the faint hiss of the kettle cooling. He watched her. She didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she said quietly, "The tea's good." That was it. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Glad you like it." And that was it, too. No questions. No demands. Just two people on opposite ends of a kitchen table, pretending not to notice the weight of a headline sitting between them. If she was expecting him to confront her, she didn't show it. And if he was surprised, he didn't act like it. Because maybe, he thought, some people don't run away to disappear. Maybe they run away hoping someone won't ask them to explain. The sun rose slow and pale, struggling through the thinning clouds like it wasn't sure it belonged yet, Dew clung to every blade of grass, and the earth still smelled like yesterday's rain. Samuel stepped outside, expecting silence, maybe the creak of the barn door or the distant call of a mourning dove. What he didn't expect was the sound of boots in mud. There she was, Elena. Her hair pulled into a messy knot, Samuel's too big flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, jeans muddy to the knees. She was dragging a loose fence post upright, brow furrowed, determination carved into every movement. He blinked. "Morning," she called, breath visible in the cool air. "You always fix fences on your vacations?" he asked, leaning against the porch rail. She grinned, an actual grin. "Storm blew this section down, figured it needed doing." He descended the steps, boots squelching into soft earth. "You didn't have to." "I know." They worked side by side without much talking. She held the post steady while he hammered, passed him nails, braced her weight against the crossbeam when it slipped. She didn't flinch at the mud or complain about splinters. Once she scraped her palm on a rusty bracket, and he offered to patch it up, but she just shrugged, wiped it on her jeans, and kept going. By mid-morning, they'd reset half the fence line. Samuel stepped back, wiped his brow, and gave her a sideways glance. "You've done this before." She brushed dirt from her knees. "Not exactly, but it's not that different from building show booths. For cars." She nodded. "Every year at the auto expos, we'd build these giant sets, backdrops, lighting rigs, platforms. I used to help the crew between interviews. They said I wasn't half bad." Samuel studied her again, mud-specked, hands scraped, sweat clinging to her temples. Not delicate, not wilting, just there, real. He couldn't square it. The name on the radio, the woman in the rain, the billionaire heiress tightening fence wire with his pliers like she'd been doing it her whole life. And maybe she saw that in his eyes because she looked at him and said, "You expected someone softer, didn't you?" He didn't answer, didn't have to. The rain had stopped, but the cold hadn't left. It clung to the windows, fogging the glass in a slow, steady crawl. Inside the kitchen, the world was warmer, smelling of brewed coffee and cinnamon toast, quiet except for the low hum of the kettle cooling on the stove. Samuel sat at the table with a mug in hand, flipping slowly through a feed catalog, more out of habit than interest. Across from him, Elena stirred her coffee with deliberate patience, watching the swirl of cream disappear into black. Neither had spoken in a while. It wasn't awkward, just still, like the pause between notes in a song that didn't need to rush. Then she said it, softly, like it didn't matter, but too clear not to. "He loved my title, not me." Samuel didn't look up right away. He just set the catalog down, folded it closed with a slow hand. The silence between them shifted, less empty now, more expectant. Elena kept her eyes on the coffee. "Carter Voss. You heard the name on the radio, didn't you?" He nodded once. Quiet acknowledgement. She leaned back, her shoulders rolling with the motion. He proposed in front of 12 cameras on a rooftop in Rome. Gold ring. Press crew hiding behind fake planters. He'd planned it for weeks. Samuel said nothing. I smiled, of course, said yes. I even cried a little. Thought maybe that meant something. She gave a humorless laugh. "Turns out I'm a pretty good actress." The heater kicked on, its hum filling the silence for a moment. He was polished, impressive, always knew what to say. But it wasn't love. Not really. It was legacy. Mergers. 2 last names that would double our reach. She finally looked up. "You ever feel like your life got designed without your input?" Samuel met her gaze, steady, every day after my wife passed. That landed. Her expression softened, not in pity but recognition. I walked away an hour before the ceremony, took the car, left everything, even the dress. "You regret it?" he asked gently. "No," she shook her head. "I regret staying that long." He didn't offer advice, didn't wrap it in philosophy, just poured her another cup. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds in soft patches, warming the dew-heavy grass and throwing gold across the fields. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and quietly shimmering. Samuel was out by the shed repairing a busted hinge when he caught the movement from the corner of his eye. Bare feet stepping lightly through the orchard rows. Elena. She'd slipped out of the house while he was gathering tools. No coat, no shoes, just that flannel shirt of his, tied at the waist and jeans, cuffed at the ankles, brushing against the damp grass. Her hair was loose now, a little wild, catching the breeze. She didn't look like a headline or a vanishing act. She didn't look like money. She looked free. She wandered through the apple trees like she belonged to them, fingers grazing the low branches, eyes lifted to the light filtering through new leaves, and then she laughed, clear, sudden, from somewhere deep. One of Samuel's chickens, always the bold one, had strutted up to her and begun pecking at the hem of her jeans. Another followed. Soon there were 4 or 5 clucking at her feet. She crouched low, whispering like they were old friends. "You little rebels, do you want a proper introduction? Or are we just skipping formalities?" The chickens cooed and fussed around her like she was one of them. She scooped one up, surprised by its softness, and cradled it against her chest. Samuel leaned against the shed doorway, unseen, arms crossed, watching this woman, this heiress, smile like a kid again. She spun slowly in a circle with the hen in her arms, eyes closed for a beat. The orchard breeze caught her hair. She looked weightless, untethered. Not Elena Whitmore, just Elena. No boardrooms, no broken engagements, no last name carved into chrome and luxury. She spotted him after a moment and waved, barefoot in the earth like it had always been hers. "You spying on me?" she called out. "Just making sure the livestock survives." She laughed again, lifting the chicken like a prize. "She likes me." He smiled. "You're not the only one." She didn't ask what he meant. She just stayed. The old barn groaned with the weight of years, its timbers creaking softly in the wind like it remembered the past better than anyone still living. Dust floated in the high beams, catching slivers of moonlight where the wood had split. It was quiet that night, one of those rare, still evenings after a storm where even the animals seemed to rest deeper. Samuel had come out to check on the latch, making sure the wind hadn't worked it loose again. He stepped inside with a flashlight, but paused when he heard something unusual. Music, faint, wavering, like a ghost trying to remember the melody of its life. He killed the flashlight and followed the sound, up the creaky wooden ladder to the hayloft. The boards moaned under his weight, but he moved slowly, careful not to break the spell. He knew the loft well, knew what was up there, or rather, what had been left there years ago. An upright piano, half covered in an old canvas sheet, warped slightly from decades of damp seasons. No one had touched it in ages, not since his mother's hands last graced those keys. And now, Elena was sitting before it, bathed in the glow of a single candle she must have brought herself. Her fingers moved with hesitation at first, brushing the keys like they might shatter. But as she found her rhythm, the music grew, soft and aching, a lullaby without words, the kind of tune you hum when you miss someone but can't say why. She didn't see him, didn't need to. Her eyes were closed and she was somewhere else entirely. Her body swayed gently with the notes, like the music was remembering her too. Samuel stood in the shadows, one hand resting on the loft's old railing, stunned by the quiet magic unraveling in front of him. It wasn't perfect. Some of the keys stuck, and a few sounded like they came from the wrong century, but it didn't matter. The barn had never sounded more alive. She played until the candle burned low, the flame dancing as if trying to keep up, and when she finally stopped, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt holy. The morning began with sunlight and suspicion. Samuel was out front splitting firewood when he spotted the cloud of dust rising up the road long before the truck came into view. It was the kind of slow, deliberate arrival that didn't belong to deliverymen or neighbors. More official, more pointed. The truck rolled to a stop near the porch, and out stepped Mayor Ruth Hensley. Sturdy boots, pressed slacks, clipboard in hand. Her smile was tight, polite the way a smile is when it's searching for something beneath it. "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "word gets around." Samuel leaned on the axe handle. "Word usually does." "You've got company." It wasn't a question. He wiped his hands on his jeans. She got caught in the storm. Car slid off the road, just giving her a place to dry off. Ruth tilted her head. "The Whitmore girl?" Samuel didn't blink. Didn't ask her last name. "Funny," Ruth said, tapping the clipboard. "Because half the town's been whispering about a woman on your land who doesn't match the usual faces." Samuel shrugged. "Storms don't exactly come with guest lists." Ruth stepped up onto the porch, boots clicking against the old wood. "Sam, I'm not here to start anything, but people talk. And when someone who looks like that shows up with no car and no story, well..." She trailed off, waiting for him to fill in the silence. "She's not hurting anyone," he said. "Just needs some space." Ruth studied him for a long moment. "You always bring strangers into your home?" "Only the good kind," he said evenly. She didn't smile this time, just nodded slowly, tucking the clipboard under her arm. "Just be careful. Some people carry storms with them, even when the sky's clear." He watched her leave, the truck stirring up more dust than it should on a dry road. Inside the farmhouse, Elena stood at the window, hidden behind the curtain. She hadn't needed to be told. She heard every word. When he stepped back inside, she was already seated at the table, her tea untouched. "They're looking for me." Samuel met her eyes. "I know." She waited, almost bracing for judgment, but all he said was, "You want toast?" She exhaled. "Yes, please." And just like that, they moved on. Not because it wasn't real, but because kindness wasn't afraid of rumors. The tractor hadn't run right since spring. It was a battered old thing, paint flaking, seat cracked, the engine coughing like a lifelong smoker whenever Samuel tried to start it. He kept meaning to fix it, but something always came first. Fencing, feed, weather, and lately the quiet weight of his unexpected guest. That morning he found Elena in the shed with the hood already propped open. She stood with her back to him, sleeves rolled, hair tied up, grease smeared along her forearm like it had always been there. One of his wrenches was in her hand, the kind only someone who knows tools would reach for on instinct. "You planning on stealing it or saving it?" he asked, leaning in the doorway. She didn't flinch, just reached into the toolbox beside her and held up a cracked ignition wire. "It wasn't getting spark. I found the culprit." Samuel raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. "You've been spying on my broken machinery?" "I've been listening to it struggle for a week." She smirked, then bent back under the hood. "My mother was a mechanic. Taught me everything before I could even reach the pedals." That stopped him cold. Not the tractor, not the fix. The way she said it, soft, like pulling a memory out from deep storage. "She work on cars?" "Mostly motorcycles. Greasy shops, late hours, loud music. She always said engines were like people, just needed someone to listen." Samuel smiled at that. "Sounds like someone I would have liked." "She would have liked you too," Elena said, her voice dipping quiet. They didn't say anything for a minute, just the sound of the socket wrench clicking into place, metal against metal. Then she gave a satisfied nod, stepped back, and gestured to the seat. "Try it." Samuel climbed up, turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. Clean, smooth, like it had finally remembered how to breathe. He blinked down at her. "You just made me look bad." She grinned, wiping her hands on a rag. "Good. You were getting too smug anyway." He laughed, shaking his head. "I don't know what surprises me more, the fact that you fixed it, or how much you clearly love doing it." She glanced at the engine, then back at him. "Both are true." And for once, the tractor wasn't the only thing running better. The sky was moody again by late afternoon, clouds dragging their shadows across the fields like bruises. The wind carried a dampness that hinted at rain, but never followed through. Samuel was stacking firewood near the porch when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A black car, sleek, unfamiliar, rolled to a stop just beyond the gate. The driver didn't get out, just leaned from the window, hand outstretched with a plain white envelope. No words, no explanation. He passed it through the air like it weighed nothing, but Samuel could already feel its heaviness. He took it and nodded once. The car backed away, tires already forgetting where they'd been. Inside, Elena sat by the fireplace, flipping through an old farm almanac, barefoot, and humming something half-forgotten. Samuel stepped in, the envelope in his hand, already damp from the air. "This came for you," he said. She looked up, and whatever song had been in her left her eyes in an instant. She didn't move. He held it out. "From him?" Elena nodded, but didn't take it. She stared at it like it might bite. "I don't want it," she said quietly. "You sure?" She hesitated, walked to the envelope, took it from him slowly, held it between two fingers like it was contaminated. The paper was high quality, thick with pretension, her name written in ink, too elegant to be sincere. Elena looked at the fire, its orange tongues licking gently at the log. Then she moved. She tossed the envelope in. It curled, blackened, and cracked open like a dry leaf. Flames licked the edges, the paper twisting violently before falling into glowing embers. No hesitation. No ceremony. Samuel watched her, but didn't speak. Elena exhaled. Not relief, something deeper. Like she'd just exhaled a version of herself she no longer needed. She turned to him. "That was the last piece of him I hadn't thrown away." He nodded, not needing more. "I thought I might feel sad," she said, "but all I feel is done." Outside, the wind picked up. Not cold this time, just clean. The flyer was taped to the door of the feed store, curling at the edges from the wind. Bright red letters spelled out Maple Ridge County Fair, Saturday night, with hand-drawn balloons and a sketch of a Ferris wheel that looked like it had seen better years. Beneath it, in small letters, pie contest, tractor pulls, live music, all welcome. Elena stood in front of it, one hand shading her eyes from the late sun, reading it twice like it might change. Samuel walked up behind her with a bag of seeds slung over his shoulder. He followed her gaze and smiled. "You ever been to a county fair?" She shook her head slowly, still staring. "No, always wanted to. Never had the chance." He tilted his head. "You? Miss Debutante of the Auto Empire? Never rode a Ferris wheel?" She smirked. "They had galas, fundraisers, charity auctions, nothing with funnel cake or mechanical bulls." "That's a tragedy," he said, leaning against the truck. "Fairs are where real stories happen. First kisses behind cotton candy stands, broken arms from trying to ride a sheep, all the important memories." She laughed softly, but there was a wistfulness in it. "We used to drive past signs for things like this, on our way to Aspen or Milan. I'd press my forehead against the glass and wonder what it would be like. But my father would just say, 'Those aren't our kinds of places.'" Samuel's jaw tightened slightly. "Seems like his loss?" Elena turned toward him, eyes curious. "You going?" He shrugged. "Haven't missed one since I was 5. Might even enter my blackberry pie this year." Her brows lifted. "You bake?" "I do more than fix tractors," he said, mock offended. "Don't act so surprised." She looked back at the flyer, the corner lifting as the wind caught it again. "Maybe I'll go," she said. "Maybe?" "I don't have anything to wear," she teased. "You've been knee-deep in mud and wrangling chickens. I think you'll survive the dress code." She smiled, not looking at him now, just watching that paper flutter like it was calling her. Maybe it was. The wind picked up just after sunset, sudden and sharp, like the sky had changed its mind about staying calm. The trees bent with a low groan, and the barn creaked in reply, its timbers shifting with each gust. Samuel stepped out onto the porch just in time to see the tarp over the hayloft ladder flap loose like a warning flag. "Elena," he called, already grabbing his jacket. "Storm's kicking back up. We've got to secure the loft." She appeared at the door a moment later, hair pulled into a quick braid, sleeves rolled, boots already on. No hesitation, just motion. They ran together, dodging low branches and flying leaves, the wind catching her laugh as she nearly slipped in the mud. Samuel reached the barn first, flung the doors open, and motioned her inside. Dust and cold air rushed to greet them. The storm outside beat against the roof in uneven bursts, loud, unpredictable. The ladder to the loft rattled in its brackets. Elena climbed first. Up in the hayloft, the wind was louder, howling through the cracks in the old wood like it had secrets to tell. They worked quickly, tying down loose tarps, shifting the bales away from the exposed side wall. Thunder rolled overhead deep and long, the kind that made your ribs vibrate. When the worst of it was secured, they both collapsed into the hay, breathless and laughing. Elena brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, still smiling. "Do all your storms come with chores?" He chuckled. "Only the interesting ones." Another boom of thunder cracked above them, closer now. The lights flickered below, but up here everything felt suspended. The wind hissed through the slats. The storm raged. But inside that loft there was a stillness. Samuel glanced at her, meaning to say something casual, but the words didn't come, because she was looking back at him too, her eyes softer than he'd seen them, her lips parted like she'd just remembered something she wasn't supposed to feel. And for a moment the hayloft didn't smell like straw and old wood. It smelled like change, like something beginning, even in the middle of chaos. He didn't reach for her, but he didn't look away either. Neither did she. The storm passed by mourning, leaving behind the scent of wet hay and that deep, earthy quiet that only comes after a night of wind and thunder. Sunlight spilled through the cracks in the barn like gold dust, and Elena sat on the edge of the hayloft, legs dangling, fingers curled around a chipped mug of coffee Samuel had carried up for her. The world felt far away up here, soft, private. But then her phone buzzed. She hadn't turned it on in days. It had been tucked in the bottom of her duffel bag, dead and forgotten, beneath flannels and jeans she'd borrowed. She plugged it in earlier that morning, more out of habit than intention, and now it glowed to life with a vengeance. Buzz, buzz, buzz. She stared at the screen as the notifications rolled in, one after another, like tiny alarms screaming her name. Missed call Dad, 12. Voicemail, 7 new. Text from Whitmore PR line. Text from Board Chair. Urgent response needed. News alert. Heiress still missing. Family offers reward. Carter Voss. Please just call me. Her thumb hovered over the screen, breath tight in her chest. Each notification stacked like bricks on her ribs. The life she'd walked away from was trying to drag her back in, relentless, well-dressed, and perfectly polished. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She didn't even flinch. She just watched the phone buzz on the hay bale beside her, the light of it flashing like a warning flare. Then, slowly, deliberately, she picked it up and held the power button. The screen went black. No sound. No buzzing. No headlines. Just stillness. Down below, Samuel leaned against the barn door, looking out across the field. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. She set the phone down beside her, this time face down, and took a slow sip from her mug. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was hers. The letter came in a plain envelope, the kind that didn't need flair to ruin a day. Samuel found it in the mailbox, wedged between seed catalogs and a feed supply invoice. The return address, First Farm Credit Union, told him everything before he even opened it. He stood on the porch, reading each line as the wind tugged gently at the corners. It was polite in tone, cold in meaning. Payments overdue. Grace period expired. Next steps included reassessment and potential foreclosure proceedings. They always made it sound clean, clinical, like losing your home was just another transaction. Inside, the coffee pot gurgled. Elena sat at the table, barefoot, scribbling something in the margins of a tattered notebook. She looked up as he entered. "Bad news?" she asked, already reading it in his face. He tossed the letter on the table without answering. She picked it up, skimmed it, then looked at him. "You're behind?" Samuel ran a hand over his beard, jaw tight. "Yeah, couple bad seasons. Vet bills, tractor repairs, never caught up." She was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "I can help." He looked at her, really looked. "Don't." "Samuel?" "I said no." Her mouth pressed into a line. "You'd rather lose the farm than accept help?" "It's not just about the land." He pushed the letter aside like it was something dirty. "It's about what it means to fight for something with your own hands. I won't be another name in a ledger to you." Her expression softened, hurt but understanding. "That's not what you are. But it's what I'd feel like." He exhaled, pacing to the sink, gripping the edge. "I've carried this place on my back since I buried my father. I fix every board, mend every wire. That kind of debt I can live with." She stood slowly. "And what if I'm not trying to rescue you? What if I just don't want to watch you drown?" He didn't turn around. "Not like that, Elena. Please." The room went quiet again, and even though the storm outside had passed, another one had settled gently between them, quieter but heavier. One made not of wind or rain, but pride. Saturday came with sun and the scent of promise. The stormy skies of the past week had cleared, leaving behind a crisp blue ceiling and a gentle breeze that rustled the wildflowers lining the gravel roads. Samuel's truck was loaded before dawn, baskets of tomatoes, bell peppers, cucumbers, and hand-labeled jars of blackberry jam. But what caught Elena's attention most was the crate of strawberries, red and glistening with dew. She insisted on coming. "I've never been to one," she said, already tying her hair back with a piece of twine she found in the barn. "And you need a booth assistant." He snorted. "Booth assistant? That what we're calling it now?" They reached the market by 7. Main Street had been transformed. Pop-up tents, folding tables, and handwritten signs everywhere. The air was thick with cinnamon bread, fried food, and small-town conversation. Samuel parked under the same elm tree he always claimed. While he set up the table, Elena arranged the produce with the kind of care that made everything look like a still life. She even repainted his Carter Farm sign the night before, white letters on fresh barn red. At first he expected her to wilt in the heat, to lose interest, to fumble when customers approached. But Elena lit up like it was the stage she never knew she needed. She handed out samples of strawberries with a smile that felt real, not rehearsed. She chatted with Mrs. Jennings about homemade jam, complimented a little girl's sunflower dress, and even managed to upsell a gruff old farmer on a jar of pickled beets he claimed to hate. Samuel watched from behind a crate of zucchini, arms crossed, brow lifted. She was a natural, not because she was trained, but because for once she wasn't selling anything but herself. And herself was more than enough. "You're making me look bad," he muttered when she passed him a lemonade. "You're welcome," she said, not missing a beat. By noon they'd sold nearly everything. People lingered at their booth longer than usual, not just for the produce, but for the presents. And as the morning faded into afternoon, Samuel realized something. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just liked being part of something real. The fair pulsed with life, music, lights, the scent of kettle corn, and grilled sausages drifting on the breeze. Children squealed near the carousel, teenagers clustered by the game booths, and the town's oldest couples slow danced near the bandstand like they were the only ones still moving in time. Elena stood near the ticket tent, eyes wide, taking it all in like someone watching color for the first time. She wore a borrowed sundress from Ruth Hensley's niece, pale yellow with white daisies, and a hem that danced when she walked. Her feet were in worn leather sandals, her hair pulled into a loose braid over one shoulder. Nothing about her looked like the missing heiress in the headlines. She looked like she belonged. Samuel found her near the pie judging tent, holding a paper cone of caramel apples and laughing at something a little girl had said. "You ready?" he asked, tipping his head toward the dance floor. "I've never done this," she admitted, brushing hair from her cheek. He held out his hand. "Then it's about time." The band played an old country waltz, slow and sweet, with a fiddle weaving gently through the rhythm. Samuel led her under the string lights, bare bulbs glowing like fireflies caught in a net. She rested her hand in his, the other on his shoulder, uncertain at first, but finding the beat with each quiet step. People noticed. They always do. Heads turned, conversations dipped, whispers curled through the crowd like smoke. That's her. The Whitmore girl. Dancing with Carter? But Elena didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, eyes locked on Samuel's, and let the rest of the world slip away. He didn't ask her to pretend, didn't hold her like she was made of glass. Just held her like she was there, and real, and enough. "I'm terrible at this," she whispered, stepping on his boot. "You're perfect at this," he murmured back. The lights above them swayed with the breeze, and the music dipped into something softer. He twirled her once, gently, and she laughed, carefree and alive. And somewhere in that dance, Elena stopped running, because for the first time in her life, being seen didn't feel like being exposed. It felt like being known. Morning broke slower than usual, with a dull gray sky and the scent of leftover carnival clinging to the breeze, funnel cake, hay, and dust. Samuel brewed the coffee like always, routine grounding him after the strange, golden swirl of the night before. He hadn't danced like that in years, hadn't laughed like that either, and Elena, she'd been radiant, free in a way that made the rest of the world seem quieter. But that quiet didn't last long. He found the paper first, tucked beneath the porch mat where the delivery boy must have tried to hide it, folded and creased, but the headline still screamed in bold ink across the top, "Heiress hiding out with farmer." And there it was, a photo. A little grainy, but unmistakable. Elena smiling in his arms beneath the fairground lights, yellow sundress catching the breeze mid-spin, Samuel's hand at her waist, her laugh frozen in pixels. He stared at it, unmoving. Inside, he heard her footsteps padding toward the kitchen. "Coffee smells good," she said lightly, still sleepy, her braid undone and sweater hanging off one shoulder. He held the paper up without a word. She stopped mid-step. Her eyes scanned the page. Her face didn't change at first, just a blink, a breath, and then that slow, sinking quiet. "They found me," she whispered. Samuel set the paper down on the counter. Someone took it last night. Probably thought they were doing the world a favor. Elena picked it up, studied the photo like it was a mirror she didn't want to see. "There'll be more," she said. "Calls, cameras. They'll come here." He didn't say anything, just watched her, steady. "I ruined this," she murmured. "I shouldn't have danced." "You lived," he corrected. She looked up, startled by his tone. "I don't regret a second of that night," Samuel said. "Not one." She swallowed. "Hard. But now you're part of the story." He stepped closer, reached out, brushed her hand gently with his. "Then let them write it. But it'll be ours." The kettle whistled behind them, but neither of them moved. The sound came first, low and distant, like thunder in reverse. Samuel stood on the porch, his hands still dusted with flour from the biscuits he'd been baking, staring out across the field. The corn bent under the force of the chopper's wind, golden tassels whipping like flags in surrender. Dust and stalks flew as the sleek black helicopter settled into the far end of the field with a precision that didn't belong to country life. Elena stood in the doorway behind him. She didn't ask. She already knew. The door of the helicopter opened before the blades had even stopped. A man stepped out, tall, pressed, powerful. His suit was immaculate, his face carved from stone. Whitmore, her father. He didn't look at the corn, didn't look at the barn, walked straight toward the porch like a storm given legs. "Elena," he barked as he climbed the steps, "you've made your point. Get in the helicopter." She didn't flinch, didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere." Her father looked past her, eyes landing on Samuel like he was dirt tracked into a ballroom. "Is this what you're doing now? Running away to play farmer's wife with a mechanic?" Samuel didn't rise to it, just folded his arms, leaning quietly against the post. "This isn't your life," Whitmore snapped, his voice growing sharper. "You have a legacy, a name, and you're throwing it away for this?" Elena stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You don't get to tell me who I am anymore." His jaw tightened. "You are Elena Whitmore. You're the future of—" "I'm Elena," she interrupted, voice calm but cold. "Just Elena. And I'm finally choosing something for myself." He tried to reach for her arm. She stepped back. "No." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, just firm. He froze. She looked at him one last time. "Go back to your empire. It never felt like home to me." Her father hesitated, just long enough for the power to crack, and then he turned. Without another word, he walked back to the chopper. The blades spun faster. The machine lifted off, pulling dust and silence in its wake. Elena stood still until the sound was gone. Then she whispered, mostly to herself, "I didn't break. I chose." Samuel said nothing. He just opened the screen door and let her walk through it into something that finally felt like hers. The letter arrived the next morning, delivered not by hand or postman, but by courier, pressed suit, polished shoes, and a clipboard he never let go of. He didn't say much, just handed Samuel the envelope, nodded, and left as quickly as he'd come, disappearing down the gravel drive, like someone who didn't want to be seen in a place with chickens and clotheslines. Elena stood in the kitchen when Samuel handed her the envelope. She didn't touch it at first, just stared at the fine gold lettering of her father's personal stationery, her name printed like a formality. "What does it say?" Samuel asked gently. She opened it, unfolded the heavy paper, and read. Then she laughed. It wasn't joyful. It was sharp, bitter at the edges. She handed it to Samuel without a word. He scanned the letter. It was a contract, a proposal, legal terms wrapped in thin affection. "Return home. Publicly distance yourself from the scandal. Reclaim your position on the board. Resume your life as a Whitmore, with new conditions. No media interviews, no contact with Samuel, a non-disclosure clause. And in return, all her assets reinstated, her inheritance untouched, control of a new division, her father's empire piece by piece laid at her feet." Samuel looked up. "He's offering you everything." Elena walked to the window, arms crossed. "No, he's offering ownership dressed up as generosity." She turned back to him, voice quiet but carved in stone. "He doesn't want me. He wants the version of me that plays well in headlines." Samuel folded the letter and set it on the table like it burned his hands. "Do you want time to think?" "I already did," she said, "for 29 years. She picked up the letter, struck a match from the jar near the stove, and held it until the flame caught. The paper curled, darkened, and crumbled to ash in the sink. Samuel watched her, the match still flickering in her eyes. "I'd rather be poor and free than rich and owned," she said softly. And in that moment, he knew she meant every word. Because sometimes the biggest inheritance worth claiming is your own damn name. The morning was quiet in the way only healed wounds can be, still sore at the edges, but no longer raw. The fields shimmered under the early sun, and the barn, with its peeling red paint and creaking door, looked less like something falling apart and more like something weathered that had simply chosen to stand. Samuel was in the garden, knees in the dirt, thinning carrot rows. He liked mornings like this. No noise, no calls, just the rhythm of hands in soil. But when he looked up, Elena was there, standing barefoot in the grass, a mug of coffee in her hand, sleeves rolled, hair unbrushed, real. She didn't say anything right away, just stood there, watching him like she was memorizing the way he looked, surrounded by things he'd built with his hands. "I'm not leaving," she said finally. Samuel sat back on his heels, brushing dirt from his palms. "You sure?" She nodded, eyes clear. "This isn't hiding anymore. This is healing." He studied her face, not for doubt, but to see if this was another one of those moments he'd have to let pass gently. But there was no crack in her voice, no hesitation, just certainty. She knelt beside him, placing the coffee down between the rows. I kept telling myself I needed to go back and fix things. But what if fixing myself means not going back at all? He nodded once, slow. "You found something here?" She looked around, not at the land or the buildings, but the little things, the worn path between the porch and the coop, the faded flannel she wore like armor turned second skin, the tin cup holding wildflowers on the windowsill. She picked a weed from between the rows, twirled it between her fingers. "I found me here," she said. Samuel didn't say anything profound. He just nodded and offered her a small hand rake. She took it. And in that quiet exchange, dirt beneath their nails, sun warming their backs, no cameras, no contracts, something unspoken became real. She wasn't passing through anymore. She was planting roots. The barn had always been just a barn, dusty, drafty, filled with rusted tools and broken dreams. But in Elena's mind, it was becoming something else entirely. She stood in the middle of the hayloft one afternoon, notebook in hand, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and eyes glowing with a kind of restless, determined energy Samuel had only seen once before, when she'd fixed his tractor like it was personal. He climbed up the ladder, wiping sweat from his brow after a long morning fencing the north pasture. "You've been up here a while," he said, eyeing the notebook she was scribbling in. She looked up, hair in a messy bun and her cheeks flushed. "I've been thinking. That always means trouble." She smiled. "Not this time." She flipped the notebook around, showing him a sketch. It wasn't perfect, some stick figures, arrows, rough outlines, but the vision was clear. Tool benches, easels, a little library nook, open tables, light flooding through new windows. "A workshop," she said. "For kids, for veterans, for people who don't fit into the world they're told they belong in." Samuel stepped closer, flipping to the next page. More notes, ideas, schedules, even a donation jar plan. She'd thought this through. "I want it to be a space where people learn to build with their hands," she continued. "Fix engines, paint murals, weld, sketch. You'd teach the mechanical stuff, I'd help with the rest. No tuition, just time and heart." He glanced around the barn, seeing it for the first time through her eyes. The high beams could hold string lights. The hayloft could be a second-story studio. The silence could become purpose. "You think people will come?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "They're already here. They just need a place to feel like they matter." He didn't answer right away, just looked at her, this woman who once walked into his life in the middle of a storm and now stood here in boots too big and dreams even bigger. "All right," he said, slow and steady. "Let's build it." She smiled then, wide and real, and the old barn, for the first time in years, felt like it was ready to become something new. The phone sat on the kitchen counter like it had for weeks, silent, powered off, untouched. But today, Elena turned it on, not because someone demanded it, because she was ready. The barn renovations had already begun, sawdust in the air, Samuel hammering beams, local kids curious enough to peek in. Word was spreading in town, but beyond the fields of Maple Ridge, the world still spun with its rumors. Stories twisted in tabloids. Headlines speculated on her disappearance like it was a scandal, not a beginning. She was done letting others write her ending. She scrolled through her contacts until she found one name. A journalist she'd once admired from afar. Not the glossy magazine type, the kind who wrote truth, even when it didn't sell. She hit call. He picked up on the second ring. "Elena Whitmore? I don't go by that out here," she said. "But yeah, it's me." A pause. "Where are you?" She smiled. "Somewhere better." By evening, they arranged a live interview. No studio lights, no makeup team, no handlers. Just a phone tripod on the porch and a single lantern casting a soft glow against the falling dusk. Samuel watched from the steps, arms folded, saying nothing, just near enough to be felt. The journalist's voice piped in through her earbuds. "Elena, the world has questions. Why now? Why disappear?" She looked straight into the camera. "I didn't disappear. I just finally showed up." A long silence. "I grew up surrounded by power, but it never gave me peace. It gave me schedules, expectations, pressure, but never quiet, never purpose." She glanced toward the barn where a new window had been framed just hours ago. "This place did. This field, this town, that man. They didn't care about my last name. They cared if I showed up, if I helped." The journalist asked, "And what now? Will you return?" "No," her answer was clear. "I'm not retreating. I'm rebuilding, for others who were never allowed to stop running." She ended the call without fanfare. No tears, no theatrics, just truth. And when she turned back to Samuel, he didn't need to say a word. She already knew he heard everything. The check arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked in a plain envelope with no return address, no handwriting, no logo. Just a typed note clipped to it that read, "For the future of this town, no strings attached." Inside, a cashier's check, 7 figures. Principal Hawkins nearly dropped his coffee. He called an emergency board meeting by noon. Rumors spread like wildfire by dinner time. Some said a long-lost alum had made it big in Silicon Valley. Others swore a famous author once passed through town and left behind a promise. A few insisted it had to be some mistake. Elena said nothing. She heard the news the same way the rest of the town did, over pie and coffee at Rosie's Diner, listening as the booths buzzed with disbelief. Samuel sat across from her, stirring sugar into his coffee, calm as ever. "They're going to guess eventually," he said quietly. She shrugged. "Let them? No name? I didn't want gratitude. I wanted change." He smiled at that, a knowing private smile that said more than applause ever could. The funds would go to repairing the leaky gym roof, upgrading the science labs, creating a scholarship fund for local kids who never thought they'd leave town, and starting a vocational program, one that might just include a little help from a certain barn turned workshop down the road. When Principal Hawkins visited the farm to thank them on behalf of whoever might be involved, Elena listened politely, hands in her pockets, never confirming anything. As the principal left, she turned to Samuel. "You think I should have said something?" He shook his head. "Nope." "Why not?" "Because the best kind of help doesn't ask for credit, and the best kind of giver doesn't need to be seen." She looked out across the field, where a line of kids were walking past the orchard on a field trip. One of them waved. She waved back. "That's all I wanted," she said softly. "For them to have what I never did." Samuel stepped beside her, hands resting on his hips. "And they will." She never signed the check, but the whole town would feel her signature for years to come. The ground was soft with spring rain, the kind that lingered just long enough to make the soil rich and forgiving. Samuel knelt beside the first hole, hands already dirty, a young peach sapling resting in the wheelbarrow behind him. The old orchard had stood for generations, its trees gnarled but still fruitful. But today wasn't about what had always been. Today was about what could be. Elena approached with a bucket of compost, cheeks flushed, hair tied back, a streak of dirt across her cheekbone. She looked like someone who'd always belonged in the earth, though it had taken her most of a lifetime to find it. "Where do you want this one?" she asked, motioning to the next sapling. Samuel looked up, squinting toward the edge of the orchard where the hill curved. "Right there. It'll catch the morning sun best." They moved in rhythm now, like they'd been planting things together forever. Her digging. him bracing the roots, both packing the soil down with care. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. After the sixth tree was in the ground, she sat back on her heels, brushing sweat from her brow. "You think they'll make it?" Samuel looked at the thin trunks, each one staked and tied, fragile in the breeze. Then he looked at her. "They'll make it. They just need time, and someone who won't give up on them." She was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, "I used to think legacy was about names on buildings." "It's not?" he asked, half smiling. She shook her head. "It's what keeps growing when no one remembers who started it." He nodded slowly, then pressed his palm into the soil beside the sapling. "We're building something that'll outlast both of us." Apples, peaches, hope. The kind of orchard you walk through when you need to remember what matters. And in that field, dirt beneath their nails, sun warming their backs, a future rising from roots they'd placed by hand, they weren't just planting fruit. They were planting forever. The Harvest Festival lit up Main Street like something out of a dream. Paper lanterns swaying between buildings, the scent of cider and cinnamon wafting from every corner. Hay bales lined the sidewalk, kids painted pumpkins with sticky fingers, and the school band played slightly off-key, but with all the heart in the world. It was the kind of night that made small towns feel like magic. Elena stood near the edge of the stage behind the library, smoothing invisible creases from her dress. It wasn't designer, just a borrowed cotton blend from Rosie's closet, blue with faded sunflowers. Her hair was half-pinned, half wind-tossed, and her hands trembled just a little as she held the note card Samuel had convinced her she wouldn't need. "You sure about this?" he asked from beside the stage, voice low. She looked out at the crowd, families she'd come to know, kids from the workshop, Ruth Hensley holding a caramel apple like a scepter of approval. She nodded. "I owe them this." Mayor Hensley stepped up first, tapped the mic with a practiced smile, and spoke of tradition, growth, and gratitude. Then she turned and waved Elena forward. Elena took the steps slowly. The stage creaked beneath her boots. The crowd quieted. Her fingers curled around the mic stand like it might hold her steady. She cleared her throat. "When I arrived here, I was a stranger. I didn't come looking for a community. I didn't even come looking for help. I came because I was lost." The crowd was still, breath held somewhere between curiosity and kindness. "I used to live in a world where everything was fast, loud, and polished. But no one saw each other. Not really. Here, you saw me." She scanned the faces, familiar ones now, warm. "You welcomed me without asking what I could offer. You gave me shelter, silence, space. You didn't need my name. You just made room for my story." She paused, voice steady now. "I'm not a stranger anymore. I'm one of you." Applause broke like a wave, not out of obligation, but recognition. Samuel smiled from the edge of the crowd, arms folded, pride written quietly in his posture. Elena stepped down from the stage into a community that no longer whispered about her past, because now they were part of her future. The orchard had begun to blush with late autumn. The leaves turned gold and amber, some falling in slow spirals that brushed against their shoulders as they walked. The air smelled of apples and hay, and the earth beneath them was soft, damp from last night's quiet rain. It was the same hill where they'd planted the first peach tree together, months earlier. The sapling had grown taller, its branches reaching like arms, learning to stretch. Samuel led her there without a word, their hands interlaced, his thumb tracing small circles along her knuckles like it had become muscle memory. Elena wore a scarf she'd knitted herself, crooked and uneven, but her favorite. Her cheeks were pink from the cold and from the quiet look he kept giving her, like there was something more in the silence. When they reached the tree, she paused, smiling as she looked at it. "It's grown," she said. "So have we," Samuel replied softly. She turned toward him, but he was already lowering to one knee, no dramatic gesture, no speech practiced in a mirror, Just Samuel. Dirt under his nails, heart in his hands. From his coat pocket he pulled a ring. It wasn't shiny, it wasn't polished, but it was perfect. The band was made from a piece of tractor gear, reshaped, smoothed with care. The setting, a tiny circle of barn nail he'd filed down, set inside with a small amber stone he found near the creek and had polished himself until it glowed like fire, caught in resin. Her hand went to her mouth, not in disbelief but in something quieter. Reverence. I didn't have gold, he said, just what we've built. Tears welled before she could stop them. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I don't need ceremony, he said. Just you, right here, always. Elena knelt beside him, shaking her head as she laughed through the tears. You had me at tractor parts. She slipped the ring on herself. It fit like it had always belonged there. And beneath that peach tree, between roots they'd planted and dreams they hadn't dared speak aloud yet, she whispered the only answer there ever was. Yes. The white sedan pulled up the gravel drive just after noon, tires crunching slow and careful, like someone unsure if they were still welcome. Samuel spotted it from the barn and wiped his hands on his jeans, eyes narrowing as the door opened and a tall man stepped out. Clean suit, camera bag, familiar face. Elena, he called softly as he walked toward the porch. It's Mason Reed, from the Chronicle. You gave me the interview last fall. She stepped out of the house, calm and composed, her apron dusted with flour, hair pulled back in a loose bun. She didn't look like a woman on the run. She looked like someone who had finally stopped running. Mason offered a polite smile. I was hoping we could talk. Not about headlines or money, just the real story. Elena tilted her head. You mean the one without panic or scandal? Exactly. She nodded once. Give me 10 minutes. I just pulled a pie from the oven. They sat on the porch with coffee and slices of fresh apple pie, the orchard rustling behind them. Mason set his recorder down, but didn't rush. He'd seen something different in her eyes now. This wasn't the vanished heiress or the runaway bride. This was Elena. What made you leave? He asked gently. She sipped her coffee. I didn't leave. I arrived. He waited. I spent my whole life trying to be what other people needed. Perfect daughter, perfect fiancée, perfect Whitmore. But none of it was me. I didn't even know who me was until I lost everything and ended up here. He glanced around. And this place? This place saved me, she said simply. Not because it fixed me, but because it didn't ask me to perform. It gave me quiet, gave me dirt under my nails, gave me someone who saw me without a nameplate. Mason smiled. You want people to know that? I want people to know that peace isn't found in a bank account. It's in barn dust, burnt toast, and a man who makes you a ring out of tractor parts. She looked toward the orchard, where Samuel was waving to a group of kids from the workshop. I didn't lose my life, she said. I finally stepped into it. And this time Mason knew he wasn't writing a story about disappearance. He was writing one about becoming. The boardroom was colder than she remembered, glass chrome and tension disguised as politeness. Elena sat at the head of the long table one final time, her posture poised, her tone even, but her presence entirely different now. No pearls, no tailored power suit, just a simple blouse, her mother's old watch on her wrist, and a quiet resolve that couldn't be touched by money. Across from her sat Marion Vale, a longtime executive with sharp eyes and a soft heart, the kind of woman who had mentored in whispers and carried integrity like armor. Elena had thought of her first when she made the decision. I'm not just stepping down, she said, looking around the table. I'm letting go. Silence. One board member coughed awkwardly. Another shifted in his leather chair. Her father was not present, his absence loud in its own way. Elena continued. For years, I thought this was the only way to matter, the only path to impact. But I've seen a different kind of power now, one that builds with bare hands, that grows in soil, not stock. She slid the signed documents forward. I'm transferring my voting rights and board seat to Marion. She understands the heart of this company better than anyone. She always did." Marion blinked, visibly stunned. "Elena, are you sure?" "I'm more sure of this than anything I've ever done here," she replied, smiling gently. "I've found my legacy elsewhere. In a barn that teaches kids to weld, in an orchard that feeds people without asking for titles. In a town that knows your name because they see you, not because they read it in a headline." The press release went out the next morning. Whitmore heiress steps down from board, cites personal transformation and new community vision. Back in Maple Ridge, Elena didn't read the coverage. She was too busy sanding a new table in the workshop, sawdust in her hair, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, and a dozen curious kids watching her like she was the coolest person they'd ever met. And maybe, for the first time in her life, she was. The barn smelled like wildflowers, old wood, and something homemade. Strings of lanterns hung from the oak beams, swaying gently in the breeze that crept in through the open doors. The rafters were wrapped in soft cotton bunting stitched by neighbors over the past few weeks, each piece a different story, a different hand, all tied together. There were no rows of crystal stemware, no string quartet flown in from the city. Instead, there were mason jars filled with lemonade, folding chairs borrowed from the church, and a banjo playing a slow, sweet tune in the background. Elena stood near the back of the barn, barefoot on the plank floor, wearing a white dress she'd sewn herself. It wasn't perfect, the seams weren't straight, the hem slightly uneven, but it felt more like her than anything she'd ever worn before. Her bouquet was a mix of orchard blooms and herbs from Ruth's garden, tied with twine. Samuel stood at the altar, a makeshift arch of reclaimed fence posts wrapped in ivy, wearing his best flannel, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a grin that had nowhere else to be but here. The guests weren't donors or CEOs. They were farmers and teachers, workshop kids and retirees, Rosie from the diner and Principal Hawkins with his camera. They brought casseroles and pies instead of place cards. No one needed an invitation, just a good heart and a place to sit. When Elena walked down the aisle, guided by no one but her own feet, she didn't look like someone being given away. She looked like someone coming home. They said their vows beneath the same beams where she once played the piano in candlelight, where they had danced during the storm, where the world had first felt small enough to hold. Samuel slipped the handmade ring back onto her finger, and she slid his over his calloused hand. "I do," she whispered, eyes full of sunlight and memory. "I already did," he replied. The crowd erupted in cheers, laughter mixing with claps and shouts of joy. Someone released chickens by accident. Someone else cried into a plate of peach cobbler. And under that barn roof, nothing felt borrowed. Everything felt true. The morning after the wedding, the world felt quiet in the best way, like it was exhaling with them. The barn was still strewn with wildflower petals, laughter lingering in the corners like a scent that refused to fade. Dishes soaked in the sink and kids' drawings from the workshop had been pinned to the beams by curious hands with too much tape. But out at the edge of the property, where the gravel drive met the old gate, something new had appeared. Samuel had been working on it in secret for weeks, sneaking off with scrapwood, paintbrushes, and that silent kind of focus he always carried when he was building something that mattered. Elena spotted it as she walked back from feeding the chickens, her boots wet with dew, the hem of her dress still wrinkled from the night before. She stopped in the middle of the lane, blinking at it, then stepping closer like it might vanish if she got too near. The sign hung from two sturdy posts, freshly sanded, hand-painted letters carved deep into oak. Carter and Whitmore Homestead, built on shelter, grown with love. Her breath caught in her throat, not a business, not a brand, not a legacy by bloodline or market share, just a truth, simple and rooted. She reached up, running her fingers along the grain of the wood, over the name that had once made her feel owned and now made her feel whole. Samuel appeared behind her, hands in his pockets, quiet as ever. "You made this?" she asked, though she already knew. He nodded. "Didn't want you to forget where you are now." "I couldn't," she said, smiling, "even if I tried." They stood there for a while, just looking. No traffic, no cameras, no noise but the wind through the orchard and the distant hum of a workshop waking up. And as the sun rose over Maple Ridge, lighting up the hand-painted letters in gold, Elena leaned into Samuel's side and whispered, "Home." He nodded. Exactly. The orchard had grown tall and full, branches heavy with fruit, their shadows stretching across the golden fields like arms reaching home. The barn, once drafty and forgotten, now stood proud, alive with the sound of tools, laughter, and the occasional outburst of music from kids testing a homemade drum set. And beyond it all, near the edge of the pasture, the fence line stood steady, freshly mended, painted white each spring, as if to remind the world that things could be cared for, kept whole. Elena stood by that fence, the breeze tugging gently at her sun hat, a basket of apples balanced on her hip. She was older now, softer in the face, but stronger in the way people grow when they've found peace. Beside her, a girl no older than 10 leaned against the wood, her chin resting on the rail, curiosity in her wide eyes. "Is it true?" the girl asked. "You weren't from here?" Elena smiled, brushing a leaf from the brim of her hat. "It's true." The girl tilted her head. "Then how did you end up with Mr. Carter? He's like the most real person I've ever met." Elena laughed softly, the kind of laugh that had taken years to find its way back to her. She looked out across the fields where Samuel walked toward the barn, sleeves rolled up, sawdust on his shirt, the same steady presence he'd always been. "I found shelter from a storm," Elena said, her voice low but certain, "and I never left." The girl blinked. "That's it?" "That's everything," Elena whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The girl grinned, then took off running toward the orchard where other kids were gathering for the day's workshop. Elena watched her go, the basket now resting at her feet, her hand trailing along the fence post as if anchoring herself to the memory. She turned back toward the house, her house now, not by deed, but by every nail and quiet night and morning cup of coffee shared. And as the wind swept through the trees and the world continued in its gentle, unremarkable way, Elena felt no need to explain further. Some stories don't need pages, they just need roots. She collapsed in his field